Come be a part of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics with your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. Hear the voices of liberty speaking all across America. Doc Holliday provides thought-provoking interviews and commentary about the issues and actions that are afflicting this country and what we need to do to get America back on track. Get fired up, get inspired, get on board with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right now.
And here we go.
Well, that's the sound of rock cracking, and guess what? Have you heard the news? President Donald Trump has said he will get rid of his Twitter account. No more Twitters from the White House. Can you believe that? Will the rocks keep splitting? Are we going to keep having Doc Holliday's rock splitting politics? Well, guess what? April Fools. It's the first day of April. It's April Fools. And you know President Trump is not going to give up his Twitter account, and Doc Holliday's rock splitting politics will keep rolling on because the rocks are going to keep on splitting in the world of politics. And for today's show, we're going to get right into it. There's so much to talk about from the Mueller report and the fallout and what's going on with the Democrats and Republicans and Capitol Hill. But today is a special day because we have a great guest. A guest that's coming on, and we'll have an exclusive interview with Victor Davis Hanson. He's the author of a new book called The Case for Trump. But he has so many books. We have a link to his book. But look at all the other books he has for sale right there at Amazon. This man is really a genius, and it's great to have him on the show. And so we're going to get right into an interview right here with one of the best authors you can read. He writes in such a manner that you just want to keep reading his books, and you got to admire the intellect that he puts into his books. And so we're going to dial him up here on the phone in just a minute, but just remind your friends and neighbors about this show. Tell them, put out this link and put it out on Facebook and let people hear what Victor Davis Hanson has to say, because he's worth listening to. So glad to have him. And next week we'll continue on with some other news and things are going on, but you need to listen. And before I get Professor Hanson on the phone, let me tell our new listeners, thank you for listening to us, and continue listening to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. And I'm your host, Dr. Ed Holliday, and you're listening to us right here on webtalkradio.net. They got other great shows, webtalkradio.net. Go check out their other shows. But let me remind you that we do have a Facebook page, and we put things on there time to time. You'll love to we don't overdo it, but go to our Facebook page, Dr. Ed Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. Check that out, like that, and we get some things on there we just can't put on the show every week. So like us on Facebook, keep listening to us, tell your friends and neighbors. That's the reason we're growing, getting on multiple outlets of the Spotify, iTunes, different networks. We got new listeners coming in, so welcome. And now let's get Professor Hanson on the phone. And right here on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics, we got Victor Davis Hanson, and he's got a hot new book called The Case for Trump. He's an historian, a thinker, a patriot. He's the senior fellow in military history at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, professor emeritus of classics at California State University in Fresno, and he is our guest right here for the next few minutes, and we are just more than glad to have such a person of deep history and knowledge, and he's got this new book about the case for Trump. Tell us, Victor, why you wrote The Case for Trump.
Well, you know, I'd seen a lot of books that were kind of campaign, Trump's a saint and can do no wrong. I saw some that more, actually, that Trump was a sinner and he's terrible. So I just wanted to kind of tune out the politics and look at exactly how he won. What was his message? Why were people surprised that he won? What has he done since he won? Why do people hate him so much? And what's the outlook for 2020? And So that was the reason, I wanted to give people some reassurance that, especially for those who voted for Trump, that they shouldn't be defensive. That they made choices that were based on what was the alternative and good policy and common sense and logic.
Victor, I want to take you back to the election in the fall of 2016 and the Access Hollywood tape. Now, NBC had that for 12 years. They knew they had it. They didn't play it. They didn't let anybody know about it during the primaries. They wanted Donald Trump to be the nominee. That's exactly what they wanted. Of all the different candidates, Hillary Clinton and the Democrats wanted Donald Trump because they knew they had his Access Hollywood tape, and they thought they were going to get him and force him to resign or do something, and it didn't work out the way the Democrats expected it to work. And
yes, they did. They thought that CNN had Trump on every night. They wanted him to be the nominee because they thought he would implode the Republican Party and then Hillary would waltz in. And they were like Dr. Frankenstein and the monster. Once they created him, they found out very quickly that he wasn't an idiot. He had a lot of good skills. He had a good message. And then all of a sudden, after the convention, they thought, wow, we've empowered this guy. Now let's go do awful research. And that Access Hollywood tape was released. But it was kind of ironic because they nominated a candidate whose own exposure to the same kind of charges was even greater than Trump's, because Bill Clinton, of course, assaulted women, not before. Nobody ever said Trump assaulted women. He just said some gross things before he was a politician. But Bill Clinton assaulted women inside the White House, at least according to Kathleen Willey. So it didn't work out too well in the long run.
No, and I noticed, and you think, why did they pick today? And I always said that, they had the ballots printed up, and they were just hoping that Trump would resign. And, I mean, they would just, like you said, they would just blow the entire Republican Party out of the water. That's exactly what they were looking for in Trump. He more than surprised them. I mean, they still haven't got over it.
No, you're absolutely right. I was on the conference call with National View writers, and I was trying to tell them that it would be a bad thing to call for his resignation because, A, he wasn't going to resign, and B, he was going to have a good debate that night because he was fired up, and C, he was probably going to win the election, and D, he'd done something that he had apologized for being gross. But men, unfortunately, have this habit, we all know, that when they get together, they can say some nasty things off the record and in private. And if we were going to tape everything Harry Truman or LBJ said or did, or JFK or Bill Clinton, we wouldn't have much of a candidate left.
Well, that's one reason I'm glad we got you on the show, because you are so good at your history. I mean, you know history better than anybody I know of, and you're so right in saying that. And I guess I wanted to reflect some on in the election. I have to admit, I didn't have faith. I just, I was afraid Hillary was going to be our next president. But you said all along you felt like he was going to win the election. I did, because he had a pretty conservative message that wasn't that different than the other candidates, 80%. Lower taxes, strong defense, right, more oil and gas, good judges. But he changed it. He tweaked it. He said, China is not fated to run the world. We can push back, and we will push back. And fair trade is one thing, and free, unfair trade is another. And we're not going to run up these huge trade surpluses based on Chinese cheating and hollow out the interior. And an open border just depresses U.S. wage earners' compensation, and it distorts the melting pot. And we've got to have legal and measured and diverse and meritocratic immigration. And then if you go overseas and you want to get in an optional war, make sure you can translate it into strategic success, or it's not worth it in a cost-benefit analysis. And that was different. And more importantly, it was aimed at the place where the election was going to be. It wasn't going to matter what he said in Texas or California. It was going to matter. That message really resonated where the election would be ultimately in the Electoral College.
decided in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, Indiana, North Carolina, and the other candidates apparently didn't see that at all.
Well, I actually didn't. I mean, I was hoping that would happen, but I was brainwashed, like the media said. Hey, there's no way he's going to break through this blue wall in the Midwest. But I'm glad you caught that, and that's why I love the book, The Case for Trump. And what I wanted to allude to for our listeners now is the fact, now that he got elected and then became president, he came in with a swagger that, I mean, is there any president you can compare him to that, because he's so different?
I think, Harry Truman, even though he was a Democrat, he was a conservative Democrat, and he was very similar because the guy had almost no political experience. He had one term in the Senate, and Roosevelt put him on there at the last moment in 44 because they were afraid of Henry Wallace. And when Truman became president, he had no knowledge of the Manhattan Project, the bomb. He just dropped the bomb the next year. He didn't worry about it. He didn't say, this is a terrible decision. He said, I slept well. I made the decision. They said, well, what do we do about Israel? I'm going to recognize Israel. What do you do about MacArthur? I'm going to fire that SOB. What are you going to do about the CIA? We're going to create a new CIA. I don't care what people say. So he was pretty decisive, and boy, everybody in the State Department and both parties thought he was crude, crass, played poker. He came from a really dubious background in Kansas City. It was much more corrupt than anybody's ever accused Trump of. They said that Trump was, they said Truman was a senator from the Pendergast corrupt mob in Kansas City. And then, of course, somebody made fun of his daughter once after a concert, wrote a critical review. You remember that? He said, I'd like to kick you and write in the you-know-what. Yeah. So this idea that Trump is somehow shoots from the hip, or he makes too many personal decisions on a whim, or he's crude. He may be, but we've had presidents much like him in the past that were quite successful.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out. And one of the things, even for even today, even talking about the Golan Heights in Israel, and what Trump did a few months ago when he moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and those were moves that, I mean, I don't know any other president during my lifetime. They may talk about it, but I just, nobody would do that, and he did. And
he did, and they all bragged when they ran for office they were going to do that. And none of them ever dared to do it. None of them ever said to the Palestinians, hey, 1947, there were millions of refugees in Europe and Russia and Germany and Eastern Europe. They're not refugees now. That was over, that was 75 years ago. And you guys have been refugees for 75 years, and they expelled 1 million guys out of Israel, out of the Middle East, from 1947 to 70. Arab countries just emptied all of the Jews out of Cairo, Damascus, you name it, Amman, and they all fled back to Israel, the new state of Israel. Nobody calls them refugees today. So Trump said, you know what, we're not going to give you any more money as refugees. It's time to get a life, and if you want to have a state, go ahead and do it on the West Bank, but you're not going to be recognized as recipients of U.S. aid when you call for the destruction of Israel. That was new, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely opposite of what happened in the Obama administration. And you heard people say, hey, we moved the embassy, it's going to start another war, it'll be World War III. I mean, all these things, and Trump just, without blinking an eye, he said he's going to do it. He did it. And that, in a historic place where I know you got the deep sense of history, do you see this as Trump being like a turning point in American history somehow? I mean, it's too early to tell, but what are your thoughts on that?
I do. Henry Kissinger was no big Trump fan, and he said every once in a while you get a guy, a disruptor that comes along and kind of throws away all the pretense, and that's what Trump is. He looks at NATO as a businessman. And he said, "Hey, there's 23 countries. They've all pledged to spend 2% their defense on their budgets on defense. Only 6 of them do. Why in the heck is that? How can that be? We're over here defending them, and everybody says you can't say that.
Yeah.
But in fact, they're starting to step up, and with the exception of Germany, pay more. Or, everybody says China's going to rule the world. They got 1 billion people. We can't stop them. They cheat. They steal copyright. They take technology. They've got 300,000 people here. You just can't stop them. And Trump basically said, well, we have 3 times the GDP that they do with 1/3 of the population. That's pretty good. And we've got 11 carrier groups, and they've got 1. So it's not foreordained they're going to take over. We got to get tough with them and make them play by the same rules that we do. And that was a shock. Nobody thought you could ever say that about China. And he did.
Victor, I do want to talk more about China, but I want to stop right here and remind my listeners you're listening to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right here on webtalkradio.net. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Holliday, and we are interviewing Victor Davis Hanson and talking about his new book he's got out called The Case for Trump. And we just got through talking some about China, and so let's talk a little bit more about China. And talking about China, I mean, is there any president? I mean, they've talked about China for years. We know Nixon opened the doors, but nobody's really dealt with China like Trump is doing.
No, nobody has. And it's all down the line, the Iran deal, the Paris Climate Accord, right. And then 3% at-home economic growth for a 12-month period, record low minority unemployment, pretty close to record low peacetime unemployment. Largest producer of gas and oil the United States is now. So there's a record there, and the alternative, is, gosh, as I said, it's open borders and wealth tax and the Green Deal and infanticide and reparations and cancellation of pre-college for everybody. It's not a viable alternative.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, because of your depth of knowledge, and you were talking about knowing that Trump, feeling like he was going to win the election, there's a part that I don't know if you got a feeling for, or you see there's a chance. One thing that I've seen with Trump, and we've dealt with it, my listeners know about it, is the African American population, where they're taught to hate Republicans, hate conservatives, and yet I see this growing admiration, small, but I think Trump has the potential to get more African American vote, even though they paint him as a racist.
Absolutely, because an African American young person now, for the first time in my lifetime, has employers asking for his labor. Before, he had to go out and find an employer because everybody said, well, we have high unemployment, slow economy. Now, we're so short of workers that employers are giving African American youth, and especially Latino youth, some dignity. They're saying, you know what, I need you. And that's a very powerful message. And then you've got to remember that radical abortion has devastated the African American community and the Latino communities. When you have a president that's saying, you know what, I'm not for that. And when you're a Catholic Latino and Dianne Feinstein and Kamala Harris go after Catholics and the Knights of Columbus, that's not such a good thing. So if you're an African-American young person in Cincinnati or Columbus or Newark, and suddenly you got a president who says, you know what, I want your wages to go up by closing the border. I don't want cheap labor off the books, and I'm going to try to grow the economy and get real wages up to 3% increase. We haven't seen that in 10 years. And we're going to try to get discourage young African American women from having abortions, which is really kind of a genocide that's sweeping the African American community. That's a different message. He doesn't need to get 50% of the African American vote. He only needs to get 25 or 20, and that will be doom for the Democrats because they rely so heavily on these huge majorities.
Well, you pointed that out, and then another thing that I've pointed out in my show earlier is, Trump. He got the prison reform. He got the new prison reform, and not only are African Americans coming out of prisons more, but they're finding jobs when they get out. I'm working.
They are, and the country needs them out and needs them to be out and productive. And what Trump's trying to tell us, sometimes he doesn't tell us so well, but the message is that you give a man an honest job, or woman, and you make them breadwinners, and then all the other problems of race and, crime and drugs, they tend to take care of themselves as long as a person has pride and there's a good paying job. And that's so much healthier for the country than, put them on the dole or have them rely on entitlements. And Trump gives the people an opportunity, and I think that's one reason the Democratic Party hates him so much, because he's kind of like a fox in the hen house, raiding their traditional constituencies, whether it's white middle-class union voters in Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, or African Americans in the inner city. And they don't like that class argument that he's making. And that's why the Republican elite hate him, too. They cannot stand him, the never-Trumpers.
And it bewilders me, the never-Trumpers can't stand him, and yet you try to get, for years, and again, the never-Trumpers have worked with the Democrats trying to give programs to help African Americans, help others, say this is what we're doing, and Trump is doing more for the African Americans, providing a job just out of a good economy that they don't know what to do.
No, and they're very angry because they were wrong about Trump's election. They were wrong about how he governed, and they keep thinking, Trump is like an egg, and I just keep tapping on him every day, and one day all these little cracks will result in a complete collapse of Trump, and then they're going to call in me, and this is the never-Trump attitude, I'm going to rebuild the Republican Party. And you want to shake them and say, hey, you don't know how to win the states that you have to win. Your message, or Mitt Romney or John McCain, did not appeal to the people of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin. Working classes voted either for Obama against our candidates, or they didn't even show up to the polls. They were so turned off. Well, and Trump got them out. He got them out to vote.
Well, and that I know we got to finish up our conversation here. I could talk to you all day long, mm-hmm. Victor. I appreciate your intellect, and the thing that I want to know is what we lead it up to. Where do you see Trump? Do you see him going back in and getting the same vote, more vote? I mean, to me, he was the unknown. I know a lot of evangelicals that did not vote for him because they just couldn't stand the man, thinking what he might do. And to me, they got to come out and vote for him, the way he stood for life, all these things he stood for they didn't know. So are you seeing in 2020 Trump being able to go in and get more votes out of the Rust Belt states?
Yeah, I am. Especially if what really makes a sitting president not get reelected or go out unpopular is if there's an unpopular war. I don't see that, like Bush's Iraq, or a recession like Jimmy Carter's or George H.W. Bush's. And I don't see that, or a scandal like Nixon's Watergate. So Trump is polling right where Obama and Clinton did at the beginning of the third year. He did better in the midterms than either one of them. He lost fewer House seats. He picked up, unlike they did, Senate seats. And Clinton just trounced Bob Dole, and Obama beat Mitt Romney pretty easily. So I think the election's Trump's to lose, and this time around he's going to be better funded, and he's going to have a record to run on, and the people running against him are sort of like McGovern in 1972 or Mondale in 84. Right. They're at the fringe of the Democratic Party.
Well, Victor Davis Hanson, I appreciate you being on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. I'll give you a last word. Anything you want to say to our listeners that would inspire them to support Trump? Well,
I dedicated the book to the deplorables and the irredeemable.
Right.
I just want to remind the audience that your gut instinct was correct, and I think a lot of people underestimated the numbers of people who came out to vote for Trump and are going to do it again.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There he is, folks. A humble giant. Very humble, and he's got so much knowledge and intellect. I'm honored to have him on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. Hey, tell your friends and neighbors if they want to hear a good interview of someone who knows this civilization, because he can base it against civilizations thousands of years ago, because he's known those civilizations. He's written about them. You can read his books. Go to Amazon. Check out his newest book, The Case for Trump. But look at all the other books he has written. The man is so, just has so much, an immense amount of knowledge, and it's an honor that we had him right here on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. So tell your friends and neighbors about this interview. Put a link to him. Say, listen to Victor Davis Hanson on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. And next week, we will continue with the rock splitting politics, because every week they're just breaking down more and more, and we're going to deliver you news and information that you won't get anywhere else. You won't get comments like Doc Holliday. You won't get people like Victor Davis Hanson. So keep listening. We're going to keep diving into the rock piles of rock splitting politics. See you next week.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember to listen again next week for another edition of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. You can order Ed's new book, Bedrock Truths, by clicking on the book cover right in front of you on the screen, or visit DocHolliday.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.